Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how Nigel Farage threw his own party and everyone in it under the bus just to get out of an awkward question from the BBC's Nick Robinson in an interview yesterday. So it's Windrush Day today, a story of how immigrants came to help rebuild Britain after the Second World War. Ships of saviours like Dunkirk, or the end of the sequence in The Boat That Rocked. Stirring stuff. Has anyone asked if the thought of this immigrant-powered rebuilding of Britain makes Nigel Farage proud to be British? After all, he said his attendance on D-Day confirmed his patriotism. Does he feel patriotic about the rebuilding of our country afterwards? I suspect not. Plastic patriot. We're at a real crossroads in the UK though. We've had years of our tolerant society being bashed about. From the outside you could look at the UK and think that we're not a particularly tolerant society. People have been lied to, divisions in society poked at. The mainstream media has given a particular focus to those who want to spread division. I am optimistic that we can move back towards a more tolerant and happy pathway, but the possibility exists for us to continue down the very dark path laid before us first in 2016, then again in 2019. Because although we must take seriously the future of the right wing in this country, with a clear plan by some to merge Farage's Reform UK with the Conservative Party in order to create a sort of far-right fascist-leaning party with a respectable conservative veneer, there are lots of reasons to be optimistic that it can't really happen, or at the very least that Nigel Farage is not the vehicle to make it happen. I've often described Farage as being cannier than many of the people to have led the Conservative Party in recent years. This is because he's self-aware. He has his views, but he knows which ones he can get away with and which ones he can't. His Putin appeasement shocked some in his interview yesterday, but others know that thanks to various groups across the political spectrum in this country being apologists for Russia's genocidal ambitions, Farage can get away with it. It fits neatly in with his push for global isolation. It begins with his disdain for the EU, then morphs into attacks on any and all international organisations. In this case, he even feels he can attack NATO. Bizarre that he can say his support for the D-Day commemorations was proof of his patriotism, yet has no problem supporting the modern-day European invaders. But this is not to say that Farage is a canny politician as such, just that he's more self-aware than many of the munchkins we've been treated to of late. When put under pressure, he folds like a knackered old deck chair. We saw it early in the election campaign as well. You could say this goes right back to 2005 when, during a visit to the European Parliament, he was a UKIP MEP at the time, Tony Blair completely shut him down, closed him off in the most brutal and spectacular fashion. It's become almost the stuff of pro-EU folklore. And yet, Farage is not a top debate challenge. He built up his public image in the UK by appearing on RT, the Kremlin-funded news outlet now banned. Obviously, he faced no challenge there because he was doing Putin's work for him. He featured on various soft current affairs shows where he's interviewed by people who neither know nor care how to critically question. He's been given an easy ride as someone who was seen to be enough on the fringes of politics that you don't need to give him major scrutiny, but enough in alignment with those who own the media to be given a comfortable seat on a regular basis. But now Farage is in a slightly different boat. In 2019, he was running a fringe party which really just wanted to pressure the government to take the UK out of the EU. It could be seen in that context. Now that context is gone. Who's Nigel Farage? What does he want? He must now be seen as someone who has a less specific political change in mind for the country. And given that he's no longer supporting the Conservative Party as he mostly did in 2019, the media seem to be a bit more interested in asking him questions. On the strength of his interview with Nick Robinson broadcast yesterday, you would imagine that Farage will not flourish in a more prominent role. He couldn't deal with any of the questions. On the subject of the clear unsuitability of his candidates, he simply said that he wasn't managing the day-to-day operations when they were selected. Didn't defend the candidates. He accepted they were unsuitable. In order that he didn't take responsibility himself, he said, well, he wasn't personally managing the process. So then he was throwing his other colleagues under the bus, most prominently, of course, Richard Tice. With that one response, you see in Farage someone who will never stand shoulder to shoulder with even his close friends and colleagues of many years. So the idea he would stand shoulder to shoulder with complete strangers, you know, the ordinary people that he wants to vote for him, is ridiculous. Even the Conservatives show more honour than that, to a fault. I mean, this is partly their problem. They often defend their own when they should not. Farage, not a bit of it. He's canny, he's slippery. He can sense a damaging political trap. But he's also clueless about what to do. He doesn't know how to evade the traps other than just to go, oh, no, 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 no. I mean, in one interview a week or two ago, he actually just described the questions as boring. When he was asked a question, he'd like, oh, she's boring. You're boring me now. He doesn't know what to do. It's not his fault the candidates are bad. The candidates' statements have been taken out of context. Oh, it was all right to call Charles an idiot that time because he wasn't the king then. Of course he wouldn't do it now, even though it was the same person a few months apart. The interview really was something else. Farage could not even put up a token defence of his own position. And the outlook is even worse for Farage than that. This is a problem for him in the future because, you know, right now he's not getting much. He's only getting scrutiny now because he's stepped up for this election campaign. As soon as the election's over, it'll probably go away. But if he ever did take over the Conservative leadership, as many party members seem to want him to, as well as a fair few MPs, he'd never get the full scrutiny that a progressive political leader would get, of course not. But he will still get the sort of scrutiny he's shown himself to be utterly incapable of meeting this month. But that's his problem for later. Right now, his problem is he's deeply unpopular. People think, oh, but Phil, you know, there's all these people that think he's brilliant. Yeah, don't be fooled by the crowds he can pull in. That's the sign of a populist cult leader. They can all get a crowd. And yes, there's going to be millions of people around the country who will vote for Farage, not just Reform UK. He will have added a significant chunk onto the vote. They are adherents. They will travel for miles to make Farage look popular wherever you need him to look popular. But polling shows what the general public think of him. Ipsos carried out some polling this election to show most people don't see Farage as even an improvement on Sunak. How mad is that? Rishi Sunak is looking like the worst Prime Minister we've ever had to people. That's the perception. He's utterly useless, clueless, feckless. Farage isn't even seen as an improvement. And when it comes to the difference between Starmer and Farage, more people would prefer Starmer if Farage is the alternative than Sunak. So Farage being the alternative actually boosts Starmer's popularity. Another poll by YouGov found that Farage would split the Conservative vote, not unify it with Reform UK, because that's what some Conservatives think. We'll get him to lead the Conservative Party, then he can unify this Conservative Reform UK vote, which, by the way, even if you added those two together, still puts them in a badly losing position. Let's not forget that. However, it can't even do that because YouGov asked, and they were asking people, they didn't ask 2019 Conservative voters. So they weren't talking about those ones who voted Conservative in 2019, many of whom wouldn't have voted Conservative before and are not going to now. No. We're talking about the ones who still back the Conservatives, despite everything, right now, are still intending to support the Conservatives in this general election. They were asked who they would prefer as Prime Minister, Keir Starmer or Nigel Farage. 30% said Starmer, 43% Farage, with the remainder feeling like, oh, that's a bit of a choice, I don't know. So, yeah, you go, okay, way more support for Farage than Starmer. Of course, these are right-wing voters. In fact, if they're still sticking with the Tories right now, you're probably leaning very right-wing at this point. But the fact that Starmer would still be preferred by 30% of them to Farage, this distilled Tory vote, shows just how toxic Farage is, even on the right wing. And this is when he's just been on the sidelines. He hasn't been in power to demonstrate his incompetence. Like Rishi Sunak's popularity at one time was decent. During furlough, it was decent. I mean, he seemed to be doing well. It only crashed when he became Prime Minister. He was put in that position of having to deliver, didn't deliver. So, of course, his popularity crumbled. Farage hasn't been in that position. He's been on the sidelines, been able to go, oh, it'd all be marvellous if only I were in charge. Oh, I'm not in charge. What a shame. And yet he's still unpopular. And it's because he doesn't need to be in power to demonstrate his incompetence. He's so incompetent, you can demonstrate it anyway. Nick Robinson had a pretty good zinger in his interview. He told Farage that he can't even manage to do vetting, but can somehow come up with £150 billion of savings in the budget. I do think we should worry about what comes next. The Conservative Party may be fatally wounded by this election. I hope it is. But the right wing doesn't just disappear. There are lots of right-wing voters, and there will always be a market for a party that appeals to them. But whatever comes next does not seem likely to be led by Farage to some sort of unholy glory. If he did take over the party, I don't want to sound complacent, but there's just no evidence that he is competent enough to bridge the gap between stupid evil and cunning evil. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching. And until next time, I'll see you later.